Today's episode of the Spring Hills Podcast, Barney Cargile joins me in the green room. Barney's a local pastor and author, and today we're going to be looking into a few of his books, Thriving in Quarantine and Thriving in Troubled Times. He's a talented storyteller. I can't wait for you to hear about these books, so here he is, Barney Cargile. Barney, welcome. It's great to have you here. I'm excited to talk about this book and to hear more about you, because I know you a little bit, but I don't know you too personally. I know you from the pastor's prayer meetings, and you've spoken at our church a few times, but I want to get to know you a tiny bit, so let's just start with this. Give us some background on you. Where'd you grow up? What was your upbringing like?
Well, mostly in Seattle. The first 14 years of my life, I lived in South Carolina and then Seattle and went to Bible school there, and been a pastor. Wow, I'm 67 now. Been a pastor for over 40 years. Up and down, mostly the West Coast, Idaho, Oregon, and been here in Santa Rosa, California for 30 years. It's amazing. And served as
Seattle. Are you a Seattle sports fan?
Unfortunately, I say that
so
to the Bay Area.
Supersonics is like a heartbreak for you.
Well, yeah, but a Seahawks fan.
Yeah, they had
the
some
Seahawks
good,
and all the 49
too.
All the 49ers fans just turn the station off. But yeah, it's
anytime I meet somebody that's a Seahawks fan, I'm like, I need to know that you've got some tie to Seattle, because if you're just a Seahawks fan because they got really good over the last 10 years, then that's not cool. But
it's lame.
Yeah, it's lame. It's lame. Although I have some weird sports allegiances. I can explain them all, but I've got some weird sports allegiances. I'm actually an Orlando Magic fan.
Oh.
Which there's no bandwagoning for the Orlando Magic.
Except Disney World.
I guess. Yeah. So yeah, you grew up in Seattle. Sounds like you've been all over the West Coast, South Carolina, you said too, right?
Right.
But let's talk about how you became a Christian. Did you grow up in church?
Right. My dad's a pastor, or was a pastor. He's still alive. He's almost 93, but still serves the Lord. And
that's
grew up
awesome.
in a pastor's home. So don't hold that against me. I'm still a good guy.
Hey, I'm pastor's kid. People seem to be okay with me. I think maybe not. Maybe they're just lying to me. So pastor's kid though, what was that? I know growing up for me, I was in the 90s. It was probably a little bit different from when you grew up. I mean, we're 20 years apart, me and you in age?
That's being kind.
So what was it like growing up as a pastor's kid?
It didn't really bother me. It really didn't. I mean, I had a couple years of, kind of semi-rebellion, but for the most part, I really loved the Lord and wanted to follow him. And I felt his call on my life early on to be a pastor, and I kind of resisted it, wanted to go into journalism for a while, but,
cool.
Met my wife, and, she got me right back on the right track.
How'd you guys meet? Linda is your wife, right?
Linda's my wife. We met at church in youth group.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I was actually a little old for a youth group. It was sort of like a little blurred, the lines were. Oh. She was 17, I was 19.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah.
That's 17 and 19. That's fine. If you would have been like, I was 33, she was 15, I would have been like, well, hold on. Let's go back to this.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you guys met at church, and you said you felt the call early on to go into ministry. Was that while you were in high school, college? What was the timeline there?
I don't know if I could say a specific date, but I would say even earlier than that.
Oh,
I
cool.
Sensed it. I really sensed it, and just, wanted to be cool. And
was part of that did you have a good relationship with your dad, and you wanted to follow those footsteps?
That was part of it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I used to always say when I grew up, because again, pastor's kid, my people would say, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I'd always say, "Well, I want to be the worst basketball player in the NBA because I get to pay a lot of money to watch basketball, right?" And then I'd always just end up being, but I'm probably going to end up being a pastor like my dad. And it was always a joke, but it ended up happening. I followed exactly in his footsteps, youth pastor to worship pastor, and that's exactly what I did. So I think it's awesome when you've got pastors that have great relationships with their kids, and it's just like generations of pastors, because their relationship with their kids is so good. I mean, we see that with Brett and Kiki at Spring Hills too. I mean, right. Kiki's now working in ministry and doing an awesome job, and it's a huge testament to the pastors.
Absolutely.
So you've been in ministry now for a long time. You said Santa Rosa for 30 years, but what was your first job in ministry?
I was actually did a year's internship in Spokane, Washington, and then was in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho for 10 years. It was almost a church plant, not quite. Came into this small little church, and that was.
What was your role there?
I was the pastor.
Oh, you were the lead pastor.
I was.
How old were you when you took that?
Wow, like 24.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez, that's
and
young.
I look like I was 15. So
You were a young
and right away
24-year-old.
I started teaching about parenting without any kids. So
Nice.
that went
Nice.
over well.
I was in youth ministry. I started at 19 and did my first sermon not long after that when I was 19 years old. And I actually had a couple people get up and walk out because I was at an old school church. They were a little bit like, I had tattoos. I'm 19 years old and I'm preaching, and they're just like, nope, this is, what do you have to teach me kind of thing, right? Always an interesting experience like that.
Yes.
So now you've been in ministry for a long time. I know you're working with Crossing the Jordan now. You're semi-retired, you say, right?
Right.
So what's the semi-retired? What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm on staff at Santa Rosa Christian Church.
Okay.
And so part-time there, preach about once a month there. And I actually get to preach around the area, filling in a lot because after 30 years, have a lot of relationships with other pastors and churches. And so, at least once a month, I'm in other churches. I've spoken here a number of times at Spring Hills and just love it. Love you guys.
But you're working with Crossing the Jordan as well, right?
I was. Crossing the Jordan is, they dissolved because of, financial,
the COVID
stuff. And they have, some of the graduates have formed a new nonprofit called Intrepid, and I do stay connected. They always consider me their pastor.
Oh, so, that's cool.
Yeah, do Bible studies with them and so forth. Yeah.
Now, your role with Crossing the Jordan, when they were around, you had worked with quite a few people. You mentioned it in your book as well. I should say that we've set this up to talk about your book that you wrote, Thriving in Quarantine. So that's where we're going to lead into here. But
and actually have two books.
I'll
plug the other one. Yeah. Well, you probably will get to that in a minute.
I will. Yeah. But if you want to talk about that one too, because you have, so Thriving in Quarantine is one of the books. The other one is a devotional book that you had kind of putting together while you were also on the cruise. Is that right?
Right. I do a weekly blog called Barney's Bullet. And you can get that. Originally, it was I know it's not politically correct. It was Barney's Bullet Points, and so I kind of, backed away from that. And anyway, so I took a lot of the articles, put them together, and they're inspiring. The purpose is to really build people's hope right now.
Right.
And so it's kind of a companion book to Thriving in Quarantine. The subtitle is Meeting God in the Middle of Our Mess, and we are in a mess. We are. Culturally, individually, and so forth. And one of the things I really see, I don't want to take off too much on this, but one of the things is there's just people need hope right now, hope and encouragement. And I see so many people that, are just discouraged. Statistics show that suicides are up, divorce is up, mental illness is up. All kinds of issues. Substance abuse. And so, I think a lot of people are desperate. And I do believe that both these books offer hope. They're different. Totally different, but yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's get into the book a little bit. You start by telling us, first of all, you're writing. Have you always been a writer, or is this something that you thought of later on in life?
No, I've always loved writing.
Because you said journalism. I didn't know about that, but you said journalism. And I'm like, okay, so this has always been a passion of yours.
Right. Even as a young kid, I started writing when I was about 6 years old. Right. Obviously, the quality was on a 6-year-old level, but I just love doing it.
So you wrote this book when you were 6 years old, is what you're saying? No, I'm just kidding.
Sounds like it.
You're a great storyteller. When did you realize that you had a knack for that?
Probably in high school. Taking creative writing courses, and I got a lot of positive feedback on some of my stuff, and the teachers would read it and start laughing out loud.
Yeah.
I thought, well, okay.
Well, you've got a knack for it. So you start out your book explaining how first of all, the cruise came about, right? But you have this way of describing when your daughter was walking to your house, you playing Sherlock, right? Trying to figure out who it is. And it wasn't one of the kids because the footsteps weren't quiet enough or whatever. And you just describe this whole thing in a really creative way. Is that something that comes to you just naturally as you're writing, or do you have to work through that process?
It comes pretty naturally, actually. I come back and tweak it a little bit here and there, but mostly naturally, yeah.
So we do, you talk about your family a little bit. So your wife, Linda, your daughter is Tiffany, her husband, Scott, and then you've got another son, right?
I do have another son, Josh.
And you have the two kids?
Right.
So how many grandkids do you have?
7.
7 grandkids.
7 grandkids.
All right. That's a lot of grandkids. Good for you.
We're richly blessed.
Yes, that's awesome. Let's talk about this book, though. When you're okay, this is kind of a tricky situation because I can't imagine the idea that you're like, well, I'm going to look at this in a humorous way, because it's not a humorous thing, but And I read some of the reviews and stuff as well, just on Amazon, and people saying like finding the perspective of one family's perspective on this whole deal, while it's a global panic. So how did you find the balance in that? Was that something that you struggled finding?
Well, I don't think so, but just backing up just a little bit, I want to make sure all the listeners know that what we're talking about is the Grand Princess that sailed out of San Francisco. This was like a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, and that's when kind of we were first, as Americans, first really exposed to COVID. It was called coronavirus back then, if you remember.
Yep.
And so, we had booked this cruise. Like you said, my daughter kind of twisted our arms to do it because it was her 40th birthday and their 10th anniversary, and they needed some designated babysitters to go along with them. So we did that. We went with them, and, that's when COVID was found on board. They had the 3 little kids, and they had an inside cabin. We were right across from them. We had a balcony, and, boy, it would have been absolutely torturous for them because we were confined to our cabins for 6 days, and then Travis Air Force Base after that for 2 weeks. But
were you able to hang out with them? You weren't completely quarantined between the family, right? You could hang out with your family.
Not at Travis. Not once we got to Travis. They were in a family section, but by that point, 6 days cooped up together. Yeah, we were able to hang out. They let us go back and forth.
Oh, good. Okay.
But we were ready for the break by then.
Sure.
But I forgot your original question. So, about the balance. Between,
well, yeah. I mean, with this will kind of come too. But I also the balance between being you talked about your daughter twisting your arm a little bit to go on this cruise. You really found a good balance also of what it's like to be a grandparent. Now, I'm obviously not a grandparent. I am a parent. But my parents, there's times where my parents, they're going to be willing to watch our kids. And even though they're loving spending time with their grandkids, they can only take a certain amount of it before they're like, you got to come pick the kids up, that kind of thing. So, how has being a parent and now a grandparent helped you grow as a writer?
It gives me a lot of content to draw from. That's
because it's funny, right? There's a lot of humorous things there.
It is. There are. Yeah, absolutely. And, because I focused on our specific family situation, I think it made it easier for me to, kind of find humor in that. I didn't, obviously would never, find humor in the fact that people were sick and dying. We never saw anyone, a sick person on the boat or at Travis. There were people that got sick, but we just,
you weren't around it.
We weren't around it.
Yeah.
And so, it was that we were able to kind of just, have a little fun with our adventure. And I think that's something that people need, especially when the book came out. It's like, wow, this is all gloomy and, so forth. But
yeah. I mean, everything, I think, so if we're thinking back from a little over a year ago now, I guess, that first few weeks of the unknown, I was just, first of all, the vast differences between people. Some people were very scared. Other people were the total opposite of that, being like, this is a hoax.
Right.
And even that was just kind of like, man, what is the unknown is kind of my point. And with the unknown being you're on a cruise ship, what kind of unknowns were there for you guys? Because you probably weren't getting all information, or you were getting maybe too much information. I don't know.
Well, the interesting thing is we got more information from the news than we did from our captain.
Okay.
I think that's just sort of how our culture works,
right.
But, we just, there was some concern. There was some fear that came up for us a little bit initially. And, one of the things that we learned, and I bring that out in the book, is that it really taught us to trust God, because we didn't know, even on a personal level, how long are we going to be quarantined in our room? How long before, where are we going to go? They didn't tell us a lot of that. They didn't know initially. And so, where are we going to dock? Where are we going to stay? Are we going to be able to be together? I didn't even know if my wife and I were going to be able to be together for a couple of weeks. And so, but it all worked out. But in the meantime, we just had to learn to kind of stay in the moment and go, okay, I'm not going to freak out about the future, not going to future trip. I'm not going to, because what begins to happen is we create worst case scenarios in our mind.
Snowball.